Arrogant bikers surround a family's car. The dad's move silences them instantly. The open highway stretched endlessly in both directions, the road disappearing into the warm hues of the setting sun. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the near-empty asphalt. The hum of the tires against the road was the only sound inside the black SUV, cruising steadily at a comfortable speed. Ethan Miller gripped the steering wheel loosely, his expression unreadable as he kept his eyes on the road ahead. Beside him, his wife, Laura, scrolled through her phone absent-mindedly, occasionally glancing back at their teenage son, Ryan, who had his headphones on, staring out the window. The road trip had been long, and exhaustion was settling in. "How much longer until we stop for gas?" Laura asked, stifling a yawn. Ethan checked the fuel gauge. "Not long. Maybe another 10 miles. I could use some coffee," she murmured, stretching. "Ryan, you hungry?" Ryan didn't respond, lost in his music. Laura reached back, nudging his knee. "Ryan," the boy sighed, removing one side of his headphones. "What? Are you hungry? We're stopping soon." Ryan shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." Ethan smirked, eyes still on the road. "You guess? You eat like a vacuum cleaner." Ryan rolled his eyes but smirked slightly before putting his headphones back on. Laura smiled, shaking her head before looking at Ethan. "You okay? You've been quiet." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, just focused." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. Something felt off. He wasn't sure why, but there was a strange sense of unease prickling at the back of his mind. Maybe it was just fatigue from the drive, or maybe it was nothing at all. But years of trusting his instincts made it impossible to ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. The highway was empty, save for a few cars that occasionally passed them by. The sun was dipping lower now, the golden light fading into a deep crimson. Then, in the distance, Ethan spotted something. Motorcycles. A group of them, parked at the side of the road near a small gas station. As they got closer, the details became clearer. 6, maybe 7 bikers, dressed in black leather jackets, standing around their bikes, laughing, smoking, chatting amongst themselves. Some were drinking from cans, their loud voices carrying even over the sound of the approaching SUV. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly around the wheel. Bikers on the road weren't uncommon, but something about this group caught his attention. They weren't just passing through. They were watching. As the SUV rolled past, Ethan noticed one of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and dark sunglasses, turn his head, following the vehicle with his gaze. A slow smirk stretched across his face. Ethan didn't react, didn't look, but he felt the stare linger. Then, the man nudged one of his friends, whispering something. The others turned as well, their expressions shifting into something that made Ethan's unease grow stronger. "Ethan?" Laura's voice pulled him back. He blinked, realizing his grip on the wheel had tightened further. "You okay?" she asked again, this time with concern. Ethan nodded once. "Yeah. Just tired." He glanced at the rearview mirror. One of the bikers had lifted his helmet, revealing a scar running across his cheek. He locked eyes with Ethan through the mirror, and then he grinned. Ethan exhaled slowly. Something wasn't right. As they pulled into the gas station, he parked at the farthest pump, away from the group. "Stay in the car," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Laura frowned. "Ethan, it's just some bikers?" The car," he repeated, his voice calm but firm. Laura hesitated but nodded. Ethan stepped out, stretching slightly, keeping his movements casual. He scanned the area subtly, taking in every detail, the exits, the cashier inside, the positions of each biker. He wasn't being paranoid. He had learned long ago that trouble never announced itself. It crept in, silent and slow, until it was too late. And right now, trouble was watching him from across the lot. Inside the SUV, Ryan finally pulled off his headphones. "What's Dad's deal?" Laura sighed. "He's just being careful." Ryan glanced toward the bikers, then back at his mom. "They look normal." Laura gave a small smile, but even she couldn't shake the unease creeping into her chest. Outside, Ethan finished pumping gas, eyes flickering to the reflection in the car window. The bikers weren't just watching him anymore. One of them was moving. A younger man, tattooed arms covered in faded ink, was walking toward him, his posture relaxed but purposeful. Ethan kept his breathing steady. As the man got closer, he tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing Ethan. "You new around here?" the biker asked, voice casual, but his eyes weren't. Ethan capped the gas tank and turned slowly. "No," he said simply. The biker smirked. "Didn't think so." Silence. Then, the biker leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You look familiar," he murmured, eyes narrowing. Ethan didn't move. "I get that a lot." The biker studied him, then chuckled. "Yeah, I bet you do." He turned and walked back to his group, saying something that made them all laugh. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. He had seen it before. The cocky stance. The false confidence. The predatory amusement. These weren't just bikers. They were testing him. Back in the SUV, Laura was starting to feel the tension too. Ethan got back into the car, gripping the steering wheel just a little too tight. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Dad?" "Seatbelts," Ethan said simply. Laura frowned. "Ethan, what?" "Now," he repeated. They buckled up. And then, just as Ethan pulled out of the gas station, the sound of roaring engines filled the air. The bikers were following them. Laura's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, I see them," he said, voice steady. Ryan turned around, eyes wide. "They're speeding up." Ethan's jaw clenched. The open road stretched ahead of them, and the bikers were closing in. The SUV rumbled steadily down the highway, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. The once empty road was now filled with the growl of engines, the distant but unmistakable roar of motorcycles closing in. Ryan turned in his seat again, staring wide-eyed at the growing swarm behind them. "There's more of them now," he whispered. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. He had noticed. At least 10 riders now, weaving in and out of lanes, inching closer with every second. Laura exhaled sharply. "Ethan, what do we do?" "Stay calm," Ethan said. His voice was steady, controlled, too controlled. Laura glanced at him, searching his face for any sign of fear. She didn't find any. Instead, she saw something else. Something cold. Calculated. The lead biker, the same one with the scarred cheek, pulled up alongside the driver's side window, matching their speed. He flashed a cocky grin, then lifted his hand, dragging his fingers across his throat in a slow, taunting gesture. Ethan didn't react. Laura, on the other hand, sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh my God." Ryan shrank back in his seat. "They're just messing with us, right? They're not actually." Thud. A loud bang against the SUV's rear. One of the bikers had rammed the back bumper with his motorcycle, sending a violent jolt through the car. Ryan yelped. "Ethan," Laura's voice was rising now, panic creeping in. "I see it," Ethan said. The leader of the bikers, Scarface, revved his engine and sped up slightly, gesturing for Ethan to roll down his window. Ethan didn't. Scarface grinned and held up a metal chain, swinging it lazily before slamming it against the SUV's door, the metallic clang echoing through the cabin. Laura flinched. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "They're testing us," he murmured. Laura turned to him sharply. "What does that mean?" "They want a reaction. They want to see if we're weak." Ryan's voice was tight. "Are we?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he braked suddenly. The bikers, caught off guard, scattered as the SUV jerked backward before accelerating again. "Ethan!" Laura shouted. It was a brief move, but it sent a clear message. He wasn't scared. For a split second, the bikers hesitated. They hadn't expected that. Scarface tilted his head, intrigued. Then, slowly, he nodded to his men. A new signal. Time to get serious. Up ahead, 2 of the bikers sped forward, veering into the next lane. Ethan's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror. 2 more had fallen back, boxing them in. "Ethan," Laura whispered, realizing it too. He exhaled slowly. The trap was set. Then it happened. One of the front bikers swerved hard, cutting into their lane, forcing Ethan to brake. Screech. The SUV skidded, tires screeching against the asphalt. The second biker slid in behind them. They were trapped. "Ethan," Laura's voice was pure panic now. The bikers surrounded the car completely, forcing them toward a narrow dirt road off the highway. Ryan's hands gripped his seatbelt. What do they want? Ethan's jaw clenched. They want us out of the car. Laura turned to him, eyes wide. Then don't stop. Ethan's fingers tightened around the wheel. Scarface pulled up beside them again, giving a mocking wave before pointing aggressively toward the side road. Ethan kept driving. Scarface's smirk dropped. He raised his hand, making a sharp signal. A biker in front of them suddenly pulled out a crowbar and lifted it high. Ryan gasped. "No," Laura started. Bang! The crowbar smashed into the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass. Laura screamed. Ryan ducked. Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes, sharp as steel, flicked toward Scarface. Something in his expression must have changed because for the first time, the biker hesitated. Ethan pulled in a slow breath. Enough games. With one swift move, he reached down, flicked off the headlights, and did something no one expected. He turned off the engine. The SUV rolled to a complete stop. A stillness fell over the road. The bikers exchanged confused glances. Scarface's grin returned. They thought they had won. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt. Laura grabbed his arm. Ethan, He turned to her, and for the first time since this started, she saw it. The look in his eyes. Not fear. Not panic. Something colder. Something dangerous. He covered her hand with his own. Stay in the car. Then he opened the door. The dads move, the moment that silences them. Ethan stepped out, calm, measured. The bikers watched him carefully. He was taller than Scarface had expected. Broader. His movements were too smooth, too practiced. Not like a civilian at all. Scarface smirked. Well, about time. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes slowly scanned the group, assessing, calculating. 7 bikers. 6 active threats. 1 who was already shifting uncomfortably. Scarface gestured lazily with his chain. You're a tough guy, huh? Most people would be begging by now. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Most people aren't me. A flicker of hesitation in Scarface's eyes. Ethan stepped forward deliberately. The bikers tensed. No fear. No hesitation. This guy was wrong. Scarface narrowed his eyes. Who the hell are you? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he did something small, but devastating. He rolled up his left sleeve. And there, etched into his skin, was a tattoo. A very specific tattoo. The kind of tattoo that meant something. The kind of tattoo that men like these recognized instantly. Silence. The bikers stared. Scarface's smirk vanished. Ethan's expression didn't change. You're in my way. Scarface took a step back. His men exchanged uncertain looks. One of them, the youngest, lowered his weapon. Scarface's hands clenched. Bullshit, he hissed, but there was a tremor in his voice now. Ethan stepped forward again. Deliberate. Measured. Unshaken. Scarface swallowed. He knew. They all knew. Ethan wasn't just some random dad in a car. He was something else. Something deadlier. And suddenly, the game wasn't fun anymore. Scarface exhaled sharply, then turned to his men. Let's go. They hesitated. He barked it this time. I said let's go. Within seconds, the bikers were scrambling back onto their motorcycles. Engines roared back to life. Ryan's jaw dropped. Wait, what? They're leaving? Laura could only stare. Scarface was the last to go, locking eyes with Ethan one final time. He knew better than to push his luck. With a reluctant nod, he revved his engine and sped off into the night, leaving the Miller family untouched. Untouched because of one man. Ethan turned back to the car, rolling down his sleeve like nothing had happened. He slid into the driver's seat. Laura was still staring at him, eyes wide with shock. Ryan's mouth opened and closed. What the hell? Ethan started the car. Silence. Then finally Laura whispered, Ethan, who were those men? Ethan's fingers tapped against the wheel. His lips curled into a faint smirk. Just some guys who made the wrong choice. And with that he drove off. The SUV cruised down the open highway again, but the silence inside was suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared to. Ryan kept glancing through the rear windshield, as if expecting the bikers to change their minds and come roaring back. But they didn't. They were gone. Vanished. Just like that. Laura sat rigid in her seat, arms crossed tightly, her breathing slow and controlled. But her eyes, her wide, disbelieving eyes, were locked onto Ethan, searching for something. An explanation. A crack in his composure. Anything. And Ethan? He just drove. Collected. Like nothing had happened. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. But, nope. We're not just gonna act like that didn't happen. His voice was rising, full of disbelief. Laura inhaled deeply and let it out. Ethan, she murmured, her voice sharper now. What the hell was that? Ethan didn't answer immediately. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the steering wheel, a small, measured motion, like he was thinking, choosing his words carefully. Finally, he said, "It's over. That's all that matters." Ryan threw up his hands. Over? Are you kidding? We just got surrounded by a biker gang, and then you, he gestured wildly, did some weird Jedi mind trick, showed them your arm, and suddenly they all ran off like scared little kids. What is that? Laura turned to Ethan, waiting. Ethan exhaled. They misunderstood who they were dealing with. Ryan blinked. What does that even mean? Laura's gaze hardened. Ethan, they were terrified of you. Silence. Then Ethan sighed, rolling his shoulders. I just reminded them why picking the wrong fight is a bad idea. Ryan narrowed his eyes. By showing them a tattoo? Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. Ryan leaned forward now, resting his arms on the front seat. What did that tattoo mean, Dad? Ethan kept driving. Laura swallowed, her throat tight. Ethan, she said softly, is there something you need to tell us? The pause. Ethan's jaw clenched, just barely. Then, finally, he said, I used to know people like them. Ryan's eyes widened. Wait, what? Ethan kept his voice measured. It was a long time ago. Ryan let out a sharp breath. You were a biker? Ethan chuckled dryly. Not exactly. Laura's stomach twisted. There was something in his voice, something buried, something dangerous. She tried again. Ethan, what did they see that made them run? Another pause. Then, finally, he said, history. Laura shivered. Ryan groaned dramatically. Oh my God, could you be any more cryptic? History? That's it. I almost peed my pants back there. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. Ryan, I promise you're fine. Ryan threw up his hands. Yeah, but how? What does that tattoo mean? What did they think you were? A freaking assassin? A secret agent? He stopped suddenly, eyes widening. Wait, were you in a gang? Ethan didn't answer, which in itself was an answer. Ryan's jaw dropped. Good. You were. Ethan gave him a sharp look in the mirror. But Ryan wasn't stopping now. The floodgates were open. Wait. This explains everything. The way you drive like a stunt driver when someone cuts you off, the way you always know when someone's watching us, the fact that you never lose a fight with Uncle Mark even though he's like a gym rat. Ryan, Ethan warned. But Ryan was on a roll now. Oh, and the time we were at that barbecue and that random guy came up to you and called you Ghost? Ethan rubbed his temple. Laura inhaled sharply. She remembered that. 3 years ago, some stranger had recognized Ethan at a 4th of July party. Called him Ghost. Ethan had brushed it off. Said it was an old nickname from work. She hadn't believed him then. And she sure as hell didn't believe him now. Ethan, Laura said, her voice steadier now, colder. What aren't you telling us? Ethan sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. He could feel the weight of their stares pressing into him. Then finally he said, I wasn't in a gang. Ryan exhaled. Oh, thank God. Ethan continued, but I worked around them. Ryan stiffened. Wait, what? Ethan hesitated. Then finally, I used to handle situations. Laura's chest tightened. What does that mean? Ethan's jaw clenched. It means I was the guy people called when things needed to be handled. Silence. Ryan blinked. You mean like a fixer? Ethan sighed. Something like that? Laura shook her head. Ethan, what exactly did you do? Ethan stared straight ahead, eyes dark. Then finally he said, I made problems disappear. The past begins to surface. The air inside the SUV felt suffocating. Laura could barely breathe. Made problems disappear? What the hell did that mean? Ryan swallowed. So, like, you were a hitman? Ethan let out a sharp laugh. Oh, nothing like that. Ryan exhaled, relieved. Okay, good. Ethan added, but I worked with them. Ryan's entire body stiffened. Laura's fingers dug into her thighs. Ethan, are you saying you used to work with? Yes, Ethan cut in. His voice was steady, controlled. A long time ago. Ryan gaped. Dude, Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ryan, I was young. It was a different life. Laura's hands curled into fists. You never told me. I left it behind before I met you, Ethan said calmly. It was never supposed to follow me. Ryan laughed in disbelief. Yeah, well, it just did. Ethan exhaled. Those guys back there? They weren't just bikers. They were part of something bigger. Laura's breath hitched. And they knew who you were. Ethan nodded once. Ryan's heart pounded. So, what, are they gonna come back? Ethan's expression darkened. No. Ryan frowned. How do you know? Ethan's fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel. A small, rhythmic pattern. Then finally he said, because the last time a gang ignored that tattoo, he glanced at Ryan through the rearview mirror. None of them walked away. Dead silence. Ryan's mouth fell open. Laura felt a chill crawl down her spine. Ethan glanced at her briefly, his face unreadable. That life is over, he said firmly. Laura stared at him. And for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sure she believed him. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but inside the SUV, it felt like they had hit a dead end. Ethan's words hung in the air like an eerie echo. Because the last time a gang ignored that tattoo, none of them walked away. Ryan couldn't stop staring at his father. His mind raced, trying to fit this version of Ethan into the man he thought he knew. Laura sat in silence, her eyes fixed on Ethan, unreadable. She had always known there was something different about her husband. The way he never panicked, never hesitated, always seemed prepared for the worst. But this was something else entirely. Ryan let out a sharp breath. But, okay, so just to be clear, you used to handle things for a gang? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Something like that? Ryan scoffed. Dad, that's not an answer. What did you do? Were you, like, the accountant or… No, Ethan's voice was sharp, final. I wasn't an accountant. Silence. Ryan exhaled, rubbing his face. Jesus. You said you made problems disappear. What does that mean? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, he said, it means I was the guy they called when something needed to be handled quietly. Ryan's mouth went dry. Like people? Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. It wasn't always like that. Laura's stomach twisted. Ethan, she whispered, please tell me you didn't. I didn't kill people, Ethan cut in, his voice firm. But I made sure they never came back. Ryan blinked rapidly. Wait, what the hell does that mean? Ethan sighed. Sometimes it meant relocation. Sometimes it meant intimidation. And sometimes it meant leaving a message. Ryan shuddered. So you were a fixer? For criminals? Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, finally, at the time, I didn't see it that way. Laura's breath caught. How did you see it? Ethan exhaled. As survival. Silence. Then he continued, his voice quieter now, almost distant. I was 17 when I got involved. Grew up in the wrong neighborhood. Had no family, no money, nothing. The gang offered me protection. A way out. He paused, rubbing his jaw. At first, I ran errands. Pickups, deliveries. Then, I got good at talking my way out of bad situations. The boss took notice. Ryan swallowed. And then what? Ethan's eyes darkened. And then, I became someone people feared. Flashback, 20 years ago. The warehouse smelled like rust and oil, the air thick with cigarette smoke. Ethan stood near the entrance, arms crossed, his expression calm but calculating. Three men knelt on the concrete floor, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. One of them, a scrawny guy with a bloody lip, shook violently, his eyes darting between Ethan and the gang's leader, Dominic Russo. Russo sat on a wooden crate, smoking a cigar, his thick arms covered in faded ink. "You see, boys," Russo said, exhaling a cloud of smoke, "when you steal from me, you don't just steal money. You steal respect." The scrawny man whimpered. We didn't know." Russo raised a hand, cutting him off. "Lucky for you," he mused, glancing at Ethan, "I'm in a generous mood." "Ghost, what do you think?" Ethan didn't flinch at the name. He had earned it for a reason. "Ghost, because when he came for you, you disappeared." He stepped forward, crouching to the scrawny man's level. "You knew exactly who you were stealing from," he said, voice cold, calculated. "You just thought you wouldn't get caught?" The man swallowed. Ethan tilted his head. "You have two options. Either you disappear from this city forever, or I make sure you do." The man nodded frantically. I'll leave. I swear." Ethan held his gaze for a long moment. Then he stood, turning to Russo. "He won't come back." Russo smirked. "See? That's why I like you, kid. You get results without the mess." Ethan forced a smirk back. But deep down, he knew he was becoming something he couldn't walk away from. Back to the present. Laura's hands were shaking now. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him. "You were a part of that world for how long?" Ethan inhaled deeply. 7 years. Ryan whistled low. "Jesus." Laura pressed a hand to her forehead. "And you never told me?" Ethan's voice softened. "Because it wasn't me anymore." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Dad, you scared a gang away with just a tattoo. Seems like they remember you pretty damn well." Ethan sighed. "That was a long time ago." Ryan shook his head. "Yeah? Then why were those guys acting like they saw a ghost?" Ethan didn't answer. Laura turned to him, voice tight. "Why did you leave?" Ethan's fingers drummed against the wheel again. Then, finally, he said, "Because I realized I was better at making people disappear than I was at keeping them safe." Silence. Ryan swallowed. "What happened?" Ethan hesitated. Then he murmured, "There was a job. Someone got hurt who wasn't supposed to. After that, I walked away." Ryan frowned. "And they just let you?" Ethan smirked slightly, but there was no humor in it. "Not exactly." Laura's breath caught. "Ethan?" He exhaled. "The only way to leave was to make sure no one followed." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "So, you, Ethan nodded. "I handled it." More silence. Ryan leaned back, arms crossed. "And now they're back." Ethan shook his head. "Oh, that was just a coincidence." Laura's expression tightened. "Are you sure?" Ethan hesitated. "A little too long." Ryan exhaled sharply. "Oh my God. You're not sure?" Ethan sighed. "They won't come after us." Laura studied him. "And if they do?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then I remind them why they feared me in the first place." A dimly lit bar. Scarface sat at a corner table, hands still shaking as he lit a cigarette. One of the younger bikers sat across from him, eyes wide. "Boss, who the hell was that guy?" Scarface took a slow drag, exhaling through his nose. "He used to be Ghost?" The younger man paled. "No way. That's a myth." Scarface shook his head. "Oh, that was him." The biker swallowed hard. "So, what now?" Scarface was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he murmured, "We let it go." The younger biker frowned. "But..." Scarface slammed his fist against the table, making the drinks rattle. "We... go." His voice was ice cold. Because he knew. Pushing Ghost was a death sentence. And Scarface? He wasn't ready to die. The SUV rumbled down the darkened highway, the faint glow of headlights in the rearview mirror keeping Ethan on edge. He had been driving for nearly an hour since leaving the diner, taking back roads and avoiding major highways. He knew how men like Moreau operated. If they were being tracked, it was already too late. Laura sat beside him, arms crossed, still trying to process the gravity of their situation. Her husband, the father of her child, was a ghost from a world she never knew existed. Ryan sat in the back, his knee bouncing anxiously. He had stopped arguing, stopped asking questions. He was just watching now. Watching and realizing that everything about his father was different. Finally, Laura spoke. "Where are we going?" Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Safe house." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You have a safe house?" Ethan exhaled. "I have several." Laura shook her head, her voice sharp. "So all this time, you had escape plans we never knew about?" Ethan didn't look at her. "I hoped you'd never need to." Laura clenched her fists. "And now we do." Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Now we do." Meanwhile, Moreau's first move. In a dimly lit office, Victor Moreau sat at a polished wooden desk, the glow of a single lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. He held a glass of whiskey in his hand, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. Across from him stood two men, both dressed in dark tactical gear, silent, waiting for orders. Moreau exhaled through his nose. Scarface made the right call, leaving him alone. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Ghost's back, gentlemen. And I'd like to remind him why that's a problem." One of the men nodded. "Want us to send a message?" Moreau smiled faintly. "No messages. No warnings." He set his glass down. "Find him. And him." The two men nodded and left without another word. Moreau leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his scarred jaw. "You should have stayed buried, Ghost." Back on the road, the realization hits. Ethan took another sharp turn down an isolated road, moving deeper into the countryside, where there were fewer cars, fewer eyes. Ryan exhaled. "Dad, if this guy Moreau is so dangerous, why does he care that you're still alive? I mean, it's been, what, 10 years? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Because men like Moreau don't forget loose ends. And I was the biggest loose end of all." Laura's voice was calmer now, but still edged with uncertainty. "What exactly happened between you two?" Ethan exhaled through his nose. "I stole something from him." Ryan blinked. "What?" Ethan's fingers tapped the wheel rhythmically, as if debating how much to say. Finally, he answered. "His empire." Laura's breath caught. "Excuse me?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "When I left the life, I didn't just disappear. I took everything that made Moreau powerful. His network, his informants, his leverage. I burned it to the ground before I walked away." Ryan stared. "You destroyed a crime syndicate?" Ethan gave a short nod. Ryan let out a sharp laugh, but it wasn't amusement. It was nervous disbelief. "You didn't just leave the game, you set it on fire before you left." Ethan's voice was steady. "It was the only way to make sure no one followed me." Laura rubbed her temples. "And now he knows you're alive?" Ethan nodded once. Ryan sighed. "Fantastic. We're being hunted by a criminal overlord because Dad used to be the John Wick of organized crime." Ethan didn't deny it. The first attack, they found them. Ethan caught it in the rearview mirror before he even heard the sound. Two dark SUVs, no headlights, approaching fast. Ethan's muscles tensed. "Hold on." Laura turned sharply. "What?" The first bullet shattered the back windshield. Ryan screamed, ducking just as glass sprayed over the back seat. Laura gasped, shielding herself instinctively. Ethan's jaw clenched. Moreau's men had found them. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The SUV lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement as he swerved onto the narrow country road. Ryan's voice was panicked now. "Oh my God, they're shooting at us." Ethan took a sharp left, dirt kicking up behind them. "Ryan, get down." Ryan immediately ducked, heart pounding. Laura was breathing heavily, gripping the dashboard. "Ethan, stay down." Another round of bullets tore through the side mirror, shattering it instantly. Ethan gritted his teeth. He needed to lose them. He yanked the wheel to the right, cutting through a patch of open field. The SUV bounced violently over the uneven ground. The two black SUVs followed, their engines roaring. Laura gasped, gripping the seat. "They're still coming." Ethan narrowed his eyes. Then he saw it. Up ahead, an old wooden bridge crossing a deep ravine. It was narrow. If he timed it right, Ethan pressed the gas even harder. Laura's eyes widened. "Ethan, no." He didn't slow down. He sped up. The SUV hit the bridge at full speed. The old wooden planks groaned under the weight, cracking as the vehicle barreled across. The first pursuing SUV was right behind them. The bridge collapsed. The first SUV barely made it halfway before the entire structure gave out beneath it, plunging the vehicle into the ravine below. The second SUV skidded to a stop just in time, barely avoiding the drop. Ryan turned in his seat, eyes wide. "Holy, did you just?" Ethan kept driving. Laura's breath was ragged. "Ethan, we need to talk about this." "No." Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the road. "After we get somewhere safe." Ryan exhaled sharply. "And where exactly is that?" Ethan's voice was calm, steady, but absolute. "A place no one knows about. Not even Moreau." "Meanwhile, back at the ravine." The second SUV sat idling at the edge, its driver gripping the wheel furiously. A man in the passenger seat grabbed his radio. "They got away," he muttered. A beat of silence. Then, Moreau's voice came through the radio, eerily calm. "Keep following them." The driver gritted his teeth. "They collapsed the dam bridge, sir." Moreau chuckled softly. Then he spoke 4 words. "Find another way through." The driver exhaled, shifting gears. The chase wasn't over yet. The SUV tore through the countryside, kicking up a trail of dust as Ethan gripped the wheel with cold precision. He knew better than to celebrate an escape too soon. Moreau's men wouldn't stop. Not until one of them was dead. Laura's breath was still ragged, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Ryan sat hunched in the back seat, his body pressed low against the seat, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The silence inside the car was suffocating. Finally, Laura spoke. "Where are we going?" Ethan's fingers tapped against the steering wheel, a habit he had when he was thinking. "Safe house." Laura exhaled sharply, frustration flickering in her eyes. "Ethan, we need more than one-word answers." Ethan glanced at her briefly. "It's an old property. Remote. Untraceable." Ryan, his voice still shaky, spoke up. "What kind of property?" Ethan sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "A cabin. One of my fallback locations from before." Laura shook her head, trying to process everything. "How many of those do you have?" Ethan's jaw clenched slightly. "Enough." Ryan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Because having multiple secret hideouts is totally normal, right?" Ethan didn't respond. Because for him it was. Meanwhile, Moreau's next move. The 2 black SUVs that had been following Ethan's family now sat at the edge of the destroyed bridge, their headlights illuminating the wreckage below. One of Moreau's men, the one in charge of the pursuit, stood outside the vehicle, phone pressed against his ear. On the other end, Moreau's voice was smooth, patient. Too patient. "They collapsed the bridge," the man said. Silence. Then, Moreau chuckled softly. "Oh, looks like Ghost hasn't lost his touch." The man swallowed. "Orders?" Moreau took a slow breath. Then finally he said, "Track him." The man hesitated. "Sir, we lost their signal." Moreau cut him off. "You think I don't know that?" His voice remained calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it. "He's heading somewhere he thinks is safe." The man nodded, understanding. "We'll find him." Moreau smirked. "I know you will." Then he hung up. And just like that, the hunt wasn't over. The safe house, a temporary haven. Ethan pulled off the main road, taking a barely visible dirt path deep into the woods. The trees swallowed them whole, branches stretching over the narrow road, casting eerie shadows across the windshield. Laura frowned, glancing around. "This place is in the middle of nowhere." Ethan nodded. "That's the point." The dirt road led to a small clearing, and there, nestled between towering trees, stood an old wooden cabin. It wasn't much. A simple structure with a wraparound porch, a stack of firewood piled against one side, and a metal shed just behind it. Ryan blinked. "You lived here?" Ethan cut the engine. "Not lived. Used it when necessary." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Used it for what?" "Hiding bodies." Ethan exhaled. "Ryan." Laura turned to him, her arms crossed. "He has a right to be upset, Ethan." "So do I." Ethan didn't argue. Because they were right. But right now, keeping them alive mattered more than making them understand. Inside the cabin, old ghosts. The interior of the cabin was bare-bones functional. A single couch, a small kitchen, a bedroom down the hall. The wooden walls were lined with shelves holding old supplies, and there was a locked steel cabinet in the corner. Laura noticed the cabinet immediately. "What's in there?" Ethan walked past her. "Things we might need." Ryan stared at him. "You mean guns, don't you?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ryan let out a breath, shaking his head. "You really were one of them?" Ethan finally turned to face him. "I was. A long time ago." Ryan's gaze darkened. "Not long enough." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know this is a lot." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "A lot? Dad, we were just shot at. You think I'm just gonna sit here and pretend like our whole life isn't a freaking lie?" Ethan stepped forward, his expression sharp but calm. "Oh, I don't expect that." Ryan clenched his fists. "Then what the hell do you expect?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I expect you to listen. Because if you don't, we won't make it through this." The words hung in the air like a warning. Ryan swallowed. Laura's stomach twisted. She had never seen that look in Ethan's eyes before. Not once in their entire marriage. It wasn't anger. It was survival mode. And that terrified her more than anything. Meanwhile, Moreau's tracker finds a signal. Back at the wrecked bridge, Moreau's men were hard at work. One of them, a slim, sharp-eyed man known as Rourke, was crouched by the dirt, scanning something on a tablet. One of the other men approached. "Anything?" Rourke smirked. Then, he turned the tablet toward them. A blinking red dot appeared on the screen. "They turned off their phones," Rourke murmured. "Smart." He zoomed in on the signal. "But the SUV?" His grin widened. "Not so much." The second man tensed. "You're saying?" Rourke nodded. "We've got them." The man pulled out his radio. "Sir, we have a location." Silence. Then, Moreau's voice, slow and amused. "Good. The pause. Send the team." The man nodded. Then, the two SUVs peeled away from the wreckage and headed straight for the safe house.